Welcome to the Black Magic Woman podcast with Mundanara Bayles.
When you look at our mob, everyone thought we were just going to die out, but we haven't.
Probably the most adaptable people on the planet.
It's this emergence of this humanality again that I find so enriching.
Be wise, be wise, be wise. Look at ways to cost save so that at the end of the day, your door's still open.
So welcome to Black Magic Woman podcast. And before we start, just giving listeners a heads up with this podcast, I recorded this at home. So the quality may not be as good as my usual podcast as it's been recorded in my bedroom at home. And as you're aware, it's self-isolation days with COVID-19. So welcome to another episode of Black Magic Woman. I'd like to begin by following proper protocol as usual and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're gathering on today here in beautiful Brisbane. So I'm on the south side of the Brisbane River, which is the land of the Jagera people. And I'd also like to extend my acknowledgement to the Turrbal people who are north of the Brisbane River. I'd also like to acknowledge elders of the First People and elders of the more recent arrivals. I'd also like to acknowledge our guests on the line today. And in my father's language, I'd like to say, Watamuli, Noel.
Watamuli.
Watamuli. And I know in Fijian, which is your language as well, how do we greet people?
We just say bula. So bula, everyone.
So bula vanaka. Welcome to my podcast, and thank you very much for giving up your time today to join us. So, Noel, I guess the first thing we do is we introduce ourselves in a particular way, and you know exactly how we go.
Thank you, Mundanara, and thank you for the opportunity. Look, I'll start off a little bit about myself. My name's Noel Prakash. I was born in Fiji. My mother's side of the family are of Fijian heritage, and my father's side of the family of Indian heritage. I grew up in a small village in Fiji, which is probably about 15 minutes from the airport in Fiji, if people have been there. My dad's side of the family is 13 siblings, and my mother's side had 12, so big families. I moved here about 30-odd years ago. I'm married to Christy. We've got 3 gorgeous kids, and they keep us busy. My oldest one is 21 and my youngest is 12, and there's one in between. For me, a home for us here is in Castle Hill, which is about 35 or 40 kilometres northwest of Sydney. And the place here where I am, it's from what I understand of, is this country belongs to the Aboriginal people in Castle Hill, and they have also links to the Darug mob, which is further out west. And in my working life, I head up Indigenous Business Banking for Commonwealth Bank, Mundanara.
Okay. So in terms of your role at Commonwealth Bank, what's happening? What's happening at the moment? It'd be really good to inform our listeners on what's going on. What are some of the yarns that you've had with people? I guess when we talk about people, we're talking about the Indigenous business sector, right? Yeah,
we are. Look, I think, Mundanara, it's everyone's, it is, I think you probably heard this 100 times, but it's quite challenging times at the moment. So the biggest focus for us is making sure that our people are safe and healthy, our customers and the community that we work on. That sort of tends to become our priority at the moment when what's happening right now probably creates a lot of anxiety and confusion among people. So I think for the last 3 or 4 weeks for us has been focusing around how do we make sure that our people are safe? How do we make sure communities that we deal with are safe? How do we make sure that there's enough, and I think this is probably a hot topic at the moment, there's enough food and supplies for people, and especially in the remote parts of the country where people have moved out on country a lot from the cities and towns, and making sure that there's enough supply for them. So probably that has been our biggest focus in the last 3 weeks, but at the same time making sure how we support these businesses that are going, because I think for us the important part is making sure these businesses keep on operating and thriving and growing where they can. So for us, it has been making sure we put processes in place and making sure there's businesses are continuing to grow and operate, so they can support the local community. So that's probably the last 3.5 weeks for us, Mara.
Wow. I could just imagine, in terms of what would you say before COVID-19, what was your day-to-day like? Like, fill us in on your role now.
Yeah, look, it's for us, it's about making sure that we better bank our Indigenous businesses and communities. I think for a long time in the banking industry, we have been, the products and services we have was for mainstream Australia, and we've tried to retrofit that into Indigenous businesses and community. And Mundanara, how important culture is, and how we look after that side of things. For us, the biggest change has been in banking is to try and co-create these products and services and understand the deeper needs of the community, so we can have the right products and services to support these businesses. So for us, over the last 3.5 years, that has been the focus on how we understand the innate needs of these communities and businesses, so we can help create products and services that better suit this, more importantly from a cultural aspect also. So it makes sense to the communities and cultures, and they've been doing business, Mara, for 70,000 years, so they know how to do this. What we got to try to do now is try and understand some of those requirements that these businesses and communities have and build that into our processes within the bank.
Exactly. And I think just from my, relationship or partnership with Commbank over the years, I would say that, having an Indigenous business banking team makes sense. And I know that one of the team members identifies as Indigenous, which is really good, that we're going to hopefully have more Indigenous business bankers that actually identify as Indigenous in these roles. But to actually skill them up, and equip them with the tools and the knowledge and the skills to actually better engage with our mob. Can you tell us a little bit about the journey of some of the bankers that have gone through, the Cultural Capability Program or the Black Card training, and what are some of the impacts it's having in terms of, I'm hoping they're positive impacts.
Absolutely.
What's some of the learnings?
Look, Mandar, for us, I think we started this journey about 3.5 years ago, and you were part of this, where we accredited 15 bankers into culturally accredited them to be Indigenous bankers, and it was quite systemic in the way we approached it. I think we wanted to make sure that the bankers, where they were located, it had to make sense to the community. So this is where the businesses either was growing or there's an opportunity for us to grow these businesses. So we sort of mapped out where a lot of these businesses were, and then we've placed these bankers quite strategically into those locations. Now, that was 3.5 years ago. Now we've got 30-odd bankers accredited. And the whole idea of this is that we make sure that our bankers understand the history and the culture a lot deeper than what we used to do with some of the online training stuff, and having you and the team part of the training or the accreditation program certainly helps us. It helps the bankers understand the history and the culture of how Aboriginal people operate and the way they do business. And the workshop that you ran quite targeted to this. So we make sure that they understand that element of it. We make sure, I think bankers are bankers, so they'll understand the products and services which they do. What we wanted to make sure was that they understand the culture, that they have an appreciation of the history that's there and why it is the way it is. And a bigger part of the training program is, Mara, and was under your guidance and under Lil's, was to make sure that we can't just do this once and stop it. For us, it's absolutely important that we continue to do this. So we have put in a program now that we do a annual accreditation of bankers. So we bring them together once a year, and run them through the training. So through what's happening in the landscape, so they understand the market a little bit more, but also to make sure that they understand the cultural side of things and they stay up to date. And a bigger piece of that is that we move this training around across the country, so we can get them on country a little bit more and get them to experience that connection to country that Aboriginal people have been talking about forever, and getting them to start to feel that and understand it. And those are the important parts for us. So for us, that certainly works. And I think it's a fairly unique offering for us to be able to have bankers that understand culture so deeply. And I think if we get that part right, then business just happens. I think you have, and a lot of the old people have told us that in the beginning, that if you get the relationship part right, if you understand the culture right, then business just follows. So we are riding on the shoulders of those giants, I think.
I love that you mentioned what I just took away from that, Noel, was relationships, right?
Absolutely, Mara. I think that's the bit we needed to work on, and I think all banks and larger corporates have to. I think we need to take time out to understand the culture a little bit better, to understand the way Aboriginal people do business, and engage. And I think some of the things that sit in my head when we sat together, as part of the training program, was when we did that an hour of silence, and how difficult it was for some people to do. I think it took me the second or third training that I went to get that right. But it's important to those things that you can communicate, and what they taught us, and the bankers are still talking about it, it's the ability to sit there and listen. I think in the modern culture now, people tend to talk a lot, and what we forget is listening and understanding. And I think listening and sitting with you and Timmy and the family, we've understood the importance of just sitting there and listening and having that ability to digest it and then speak. So those are the important parts that we talk a lot about with our bankers, and I think what that allows them to do when they are meeting with customers, have that ability or practice that a little bit more to be able to sit and understand what the requirements are, what the customer's talking to us about, and we need to be more practice with that, I think.
Oh, of course. And I keep thinking about our business banker, Mark McKillop, had a yarn with my finance manager yesterday. And he said to Karen, black card training changed my life. He said, I'm a better person at home. I'm building relationships with people in my family. I'm engaging on a different level. So it hasn't just impacted on his professional life as a business banker, part of the Indigenous Business Banking team, but on a personal level as well. And I'll tell you now, when I met Mark, and I'll give you the scenario. Now, when I met Mark, he came in with a senior banker, and they sat down at the table, a boardroom here in Brisbane at the radio station, and Annie Lilla and I and our finance manager, we're sitting there, and they come in and they're in their suits and, very professional, and this kind of, thank you very much, shake the hands, thank you very much for giving us your time. And as they sat down, they then kind of, the products and services was obviously a resource, a booklet on the table, a really nice fancy booklet, and he slid it across the table to me and Aunt Lilla and basically said, here's what we can do for you. And he went straight into business. And immediately, within a split second, Auntie Lilla put her hand on the booklet and slid it back towards them. And she said, no, dear, that's not how you start business. And it's a moment that I will always remember. And the look on their face, right? It was like, oh, no, I've just offended an elder, because Aunt Lilla's nearly 80. And he said, oh, okay, I'm sorry. And Auntie Lilla said, no, that's okay. She says, I don't know you, and I don't know the gentleman beside you, and you don't know this young lass beside me. So what we will do is we'll actually build a relationship, and we'll get to know each other first, because that's what's most important. And then we may not even talk about business, or we may, but let's focus on the relationship. And I'm going to introduce myself, and I'm going to tell you who I am, and I'm going to then pass it on to Mundanara next to me, and we're going to go around. And then if it's right, we'll start talking about business. And in that moment, Noel, Mark introduced himself, right? The older gentleman then introduced himself. And the older gentleman, Mark said that they spend more time with each other than they do with their own families. right? This is what Mark just said before he did his introduction. And when the older gentleman said that he was going to become a grandfather for the first time, Mark nearly fell off his chair. Mark could not believe that in all of the time they spent together, that not once did they mention their families. Not once did he mention that he's going to become a grandfather for the very first time. And Annie Lilla and I and Karen were sitting there, and we had a good laugh about it, because the look on both of their faces when he said that, it was just like, you didn't tell me this. And then the older fellow goes, well, we don't talk about family.
Yeah.
And from that moment, Mark said to me, now when I walk into a client to engage with customers or businesses, whether they're my current clients or potential clients, I've changed the way that I engage now. I go in there and I focus on building relationships, and that's the objective of the meeting. And if business arises and we get to talk about business, and that's great, but I'm not expecting straight away to get straight into business and then to have an outcome. The investment in that relationship, is not just about how do I engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, businesses and communities, but how do I engage with people? And I think that's been one of my highlights of working with the bank and meeting people like Mark McKillop, and knowing that our training has changed his life, in a positive way, that he's able to take the learnings and put it into practice with any person that he interacts with, right?
Look, and I think Mark still uses that. I think he still uses. I sat in with his boss when I was in Brisbane a few months ago, and he shared the same story. When we were talking to, I think we may have spoken about it. We've set up a call centre in Brisbane that will look at supporting our smaller businesses that before they couldn't reach into us, and so we put some of those bankers training through that. And I got Mark to share this story, and it still gives me goosebumps. And how passionate it is. But that's just one of them, Mara. We've had bankers, and I think I might have shared this with you. We've had bankers, two that comes to mind. These are old-time bankers. So these are bankers in the Middle Ages. One a female start banker, very successful, based in South Australia, and doing very well, but a hardcore banker to the core. And we were quite deliberate in picking that because we wanted to grow the business in South Australia. And we looked at the book. She had a couple of Indigenous businesses in the portfolio, but I have had dealings with it before, so I knew that it would be a little bit challenging. But when we sat through the training, and you probably remember, this was on part of your old country, we sat in Redfern in the NCIE Centre, and we went through that and sat in the circle while we're having a yarn. And when she went through just the introduction part, and she spoke about that a little bit, and you could see that she was uncomfortable talking about herself. These are bankers. They want to get in there and be in control and talk about business and sign up a deal and walk away. You saw that she struggled to talk about herself. And I don't think anyone in the room knew that. She had two kids that were doing HSC, and I still remember that. And we had, she was, her husband was a doctor. No one knew that. And they had a farm up in South Australia that they grew small cattle and small animals and stuff. No one knew that. And I think it just to say that, you could just see the pride. But to me, the cream on this all was when we finished the first session, we went for morning tea, she just sat there. She sat there for about 5 minutes. So I walked over and I said, and are you okay? She had tears in her eyes. She goes, I'm just doing this. She goes, why don't we do this? Why don't we talk about us? We generally talk about ourselves when someone's leaving and we have a farewell speech. Why can't we do this when we meet people? It was funny though, and I can't even, we know Aboriginal people have been doing this for 70,000 years. So, and that's the importance part of it. And I think things like that, and she sent me an email, beautiful email after that, and thanking me for allowing her to be part of this. But what she said in there was, I think, exactly what Mark said, that we've made her a better person. She goes, why I've been in the bank, been a career banker for 30 odd years. She goes, I've never felt this vulnerable in front of the people, but I've never felt so proud to be able to share my family with these people that I'm going to work with now. And I think you and I may have said this to you many times, Mara, and I think I've said through a few of your workshops, you start the workshop as co-workers, I think, and just the program we run them through. And by the time we finish the day and a half later, we are family. And that's a beautiful thing about this. I think there needs to be more of this. Especially times like this, I think the amount of time I have bankers just ringing up and saying, are you okay? And another time, I think just on this topic, Mara, when we went through a little bit of a tough time about a year ago when the Royal Commission was on, the amount of calls I got from the people that I engaged with, yourself included, a call just to see if I'm okay. It had very little to do with me. It was my boss and their bosses. They were part of the Royal Commission that was going through. But the amount of calls I got from people just checking up on me, seeing if I was okay, to me, that's the importance about relationship.
Yeah, because of those relationships that you have with them, right? That you've invested in, you've invested in time to build these relationships.
And we share this, and I think that's what we're doing with our bankers a lot, Mara. So I think this was one, and I missed it, but there was just another gentleman, same thing, that staunch banker, Victorian-based, so we're not going to hold that against him, but older banker, similar sort of stuff. We went through the training, and he talked about himself a little bit. And you know how when you run this program, if you remember, you kind of say, I spent 5 minutes talking about all this. I think he spoke for 30 minutes. And it was just getting it. He just wanted to talk. I've never heard him talk so much. But ended that, I think when I got an email from him 2 weeks later, it was funny though. He said, look, and I said to him, how's it going? And when I was speaking to him, he said, I'm going to send you an email. And he did, and I've still kept it. But he said that one of the things he didn't know, what he learned from the workshop was, he lived in a cul-de-sac, and he said, I didn't know my neighbours. I've lived there for 14 years, and I didn't know my neighbours. And he goes, after doing this workshop, it allowed me to get on and knock on my neighbour's door and just say good day to him.
Wow.
And he said, I just wanted, because to me, to him, the family was just him, his wife, and his kids.
Yeah. And
he said, what the cultural awareness training talked about is the bigger part of the universe we exist in, and how it all fits in, and how important it is to have relationships with the neighbours. And now he was telling me that I was talking to him last week. He said, we they cook for each other, and they go and drop food to each other's place. And those are the legacies that you've left with this cultural training and with our bankers. And I think for me, those are the things we want to keep on growing and getting more bankers trained up. Either they're in this space or not, Mundanara, but absolutely, because what it helps us is allows us to be better people, and allows us to have better relationships, and more importantly, deeper relationships and genuine ones. And I think just on your topic around when you said, when Annalila was talking to Mark, we may do business, we may not. That is such a huge learning for me. I had a similar experience, and I think it would have been Annie Mary who said to me, she goes, I wanted to understand a little bit more about relationships. She goes, no, you will know when you're ready. And it took me about 3 years to understand that. But all that means is when it's working both ways, that's when it works best. And I think often what we tend to do is we just play our part and we assume that that's working. But I think in a lot of the cases, we just have to make sure and give it time when both parties are feeling comfortable. And I think to be able to do that, we have to give a little bit more than we take out of this relationship. That's been my journey.
I absolutely love it. And I'm really glad that we're sharing stories, Noel, of what's been happening at the bank and some of the bankers' journeys and experiences, post Black Card training. Because at the end of the day, when you think about, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the barriers to participate in the economy, right? You fellas need to be more skilled up and more equipped to be able to first engage with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, right? Knowing that there's been low intergenerational wealth transfer, knowing the impact of past policies around poor education and health outcomes, knowing the high rates of unemployment, which means that you require additional support. which means that they will require additional business support, especially if, so for instance, in my family, Noel, I'm the first to finish high school, right?
Yep.
In my family, on both sides, my mum and dad's side, none of my dad's brothers went to university. None of my mother's family had been to university. My grandmother's sister, Auntie Lilla, and my grandmother were university students at UQ back in the 70s and 80s. So in terms of access to education, access to employment, and maybe being the first in the family to have a job, and then to be the first in the family to even have a business. So for some Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people and families out there, they're the first, right? And we're talking about being, the year 2020, whereas for non-Aboriginal people, especially when we look at white-fella families, they might have 5-6 generations of family members being in business, or family members finishing year 12, or family members completing university courses and so on. So to understand the history in this country is very important for the bankers, right? So that they understand some of the challenges and the complexities, because you're not just engaging with one people, and you know this, Noel. We are many peoples from many different language groups and have different ways of being and different ways of seeing the world. But we also have a lot of commonalities. When we think about being human, we have a lot more in common than we do have differences. And with Black Card, we try and focus on some of our commonalities, and we give people a highly generalised view of Aboriginal people, culture, history and society, so that people at least have those foundations. So moving forward now, when we think about the Indigenous business sector, what would you say from your experience now in terms of the current situation with COVID-19? What's some of the calls you've been dealing with, or some of the emails you've received, or some of the yarns that you've had with some of our Indigenous businesses?
Yeah, look, I think with every rainy season, there's always a rainbow. So we sadly are starting to see some of the business doing really, really well in this space, and I think the ones that have been in sectors where they are supporting, health and creating products that are suitable for health and the likes are doing amazingly well. There's businesses that are now under the Indigenous Procurement policy, and those things are doing wonders for these businesses too, where these businesses are starting to pick up contracts a lot easier for us. It's understanding those businesses a little bit better and the requirements a little bit better to be able to support them. And I think the ones that we're dealing with, that I've been dealing with over the last couple of weeks, was around making sure how we support these businesses so we can get the goods and services they're after to be able to bring in. These are the guys that are creating, supplying hand sanitizers, the likes of face masks and gloves and the likes to some of the corporates and some of the government sectors. And to be able to having bankers that understand the background that you've talked about, Mara, and understanding some of that history, it allows us to better service these guys. And some of the stuff we're going through now is understanding the needs in a little bit more detail, so we can, if they're looking for finance, we can assess it accordingly to be able to help them with the finances so they can continue to do this. There are clients and customers that are based up north and west. These are some of the customers that are working in mines. We are supporting the mining industry. We are in construction industries. We are starting to look at how do we better engage with some of our tier one suppliers to support these businesses get off the ground a little bit quicker. So it's around understanding their needs in a little bit more detail, knowing that just like we do in the mainstream business, as you touched on, Mara, to start to, we are not jumping on and sort of trying to talk about security first, because we know the history of how it was about 40 years ago. Yeah. So for us, it's understanding those history and then coming up with solutions that can help them. So how do we better talk about cash flow management with these customers? How do we better talk about using some of these contracts to be able to leverage that to provide them with the funding? These are some of the things that has been going on from the rainbow side of things. And there are challenges too. There are, I think, some of the challenges that some of our customers are dealing with, especially the logistics businesses, is making sure that we get the foods and the health materials and the likes to the communities. We know all those communities are locked down, and I think the other challenge has been that a lot of these communities have been sent back home, and we just want to make sure that how do we support some of those businesses to make sure that they get the required, if they're needing food equipment or medical equipment, they'll be getting it out to the communities as best we can. So again, understanding the background certainly helps us to be able to talk through to our credit areas to be able to help us make those better decisions. So these are some of the challenges on that side. And I think there are businesses that are struggling. Any businesses that's in the retail sector, any businesses that's been in hospitality, tourism, all those businesses are suffering. So for us, we're making sure that there's products and services that are there to help these guys. And for business clients, we've reduced the rates on our loans so they can. It helps them with the repayments. We've frozen repayments on some of these loans, business loans, to make sure that it gives them a bit more money to be able to keep their staff or to buy more stock. So these are some of the stuff that we're doing to make sure that we support these businesses. And for consumers, do you know, Mara, we've looked at if they have home loans, we've reduced the rates on that. We've frozen the repayments on the home loans. So these are some of the things we have been doing to make sure that these customers that are going through these tough times at the moment, we do our bit to make sure we support them as much as we can in those things. So if the listeners out there, if your podcast group, if your businesses or communities that you needed help or you need a hand with any of these things, please reach out. There's a dedicated page on Commbank's website, and I think most banks have that also. Jump on there and have a look at what are some of those avenues available to you to be able to help your business or communities in some other ways. And these loans that I've talked about, Mara, to businesses and offering to businesses, they also are available to the not-for-profits in this space, so the land councils and the likes, anyone that's supporting the community, they all qualify for the same benefits they have, where we're providing loans with minimal interest and shorter period. So these are some of the things we're doing to help these businesses now.
And I want to just point out, in terms of when you look at the Indigenous business sector,
yep,
approximately 16,000 Indigenous businesses or Indigenous-owned businesses across Australia. I guess it's growing rapidly, right? It hasn't really matured. It hasn't really taken off, right? So it's still in its kind of early growth, would you say?
Absolutely. So I think we think that by 2026, there's going to be over 73,000 Indigenous Australians who will be of working age. So based on those numbers and the rate the business is growing now, we're looking at about 2,200, 2,500 new businesses starting in this short period. So it's a sector that's growing. We absolutely understand, and there's a lot been done in this space for this business sector. Mundanara, we have these businesses hubs that are popping up, and we're forming partnership. A lot of these Indigenous business hubs and chambers to be able to reach out to these businesses and support them. We absolutely know that there's a need for these under the procurement policy. I think the last time we looked at it, there's not enough businesses to pick up all the contracts if the parity is exercised by all the state and the federal government. There's not enough businesses to take up these contracts. So absolutely, there's need for us to grow more Indigenous businesses. And from what we are seeing, it's a healthy sector. It's doing amazingly well. And I'm hoping that this virus thing's a short-lived one. And when it all turns the corner, we want to be there to be able to help these businesses along.
Of course. And, when I think about in terms of what the Indigenous business sector contributes to the economy, it's roughly around $6.6 billion, right? Absolutely. And I think just the Supply Nation ones, Mara, I think they did a stock take a few years ago, and there was $1 billion worth of revenue to the businesses that are with Supply Nation, and there's a lot more that are not. So absolutely a very healthy sector. And I think now the government's getting behind to support some of these businesses. Corporates are getting behind it. A lot of the other corporates are doing something very similar. You'd probably understand, Mara, with the Reconciliation Action Plan and the top end of the corporate businesses that have these reps in place.
they all are making sure they have a better understanding of these businesses and the requirements. So they're making sure that the procurements and the well-being and the governance and reporting is all handled appropriately. So we do a lot better for the sector.
Of course. And Noel, you mentioned the Indigenous Procurement Policy, known as the IPP. For some of the listeners that are not too sure about the IPP, can you give us a little bit of talk about the IPP a little bit for our listeners?
Yes, I think this came into place a few years back, and the whole idea of this is to be able to help Indigenous businesses or Indigenous business sector grow. So I think it got kicked off by the Commonwealth or the federal government, where they said 3% of, or parity they call it, 3% of their spend will be spent with Indigenous businesses. So, and I think over the last couple of years they do it amazingly well, and I think against all targets set. But the whole idea is that, and I think it was federal government initially, but right now, last year, I think it's passed on to the state governments also. The 3% of the spend that the governments are having has to go to Indigenous businesses. Or those leads by the government, you see that a lot of this tier one elevated rep clients or corporates are starting to follow in the same suit. So the Commonwealth Bank's doing the same thing, and I know that there's other larger corporates that are doing exactly that, where a percentage of their spend or the procurement spend has to go to Indigenous businesses, and we are absolutely working towards that.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that with Commonwealth Bank and the Elevate RAP, there's obviously procurement targets.
Yeah, so we've committed to meeting the similar sort of benchmarks. We've set ourselves a 10 million spend by 2020 with Indigenous businesses, and we are well on track to be able to meeting that.
Oh, that is absolutely wonderful to hear. And in terms of some advice now, Noel, just from Commbank's perspective or even from your own personal perspective, some advice moving forward for some of our Indigenous businesses that may be going through some hard times, may be struggling. I know you mentioned there's some resources now on Commbank's website.
Absolutely, and I think we'll post a link underneath this podcast also, where there's offers available for these clients. And again, it's for both business and personal customers. Yeah. So if you're in the circumstances, jump on the website, or even if you wanted to just give us a call, there's the Commbank's main telephone banking number, which is 132221. If you give us a call, we will certainly, if you're a business or a personal client that needs help with some reprieve, please reach out to us, and we'll be able to guide you through. If you have a relationship banker, you want to talk to them, and they'll be able to help you, not just the help that we have available in the bank, but also how to reach some of this other help that's around due to this virus. And I know there's governments that are doing a lot in this space also. So please reach out, and there's a lot of information on there around this and where you can get help from. But if you have a banker, as I mentioned, have a yarn to them, and they will certainly be able to guide you to what some of those other assistance and advice you can get. Excellent.
And I want to kind of wrap up this podcast with, so in terms of Commonwealth Bank's Reconciliation Action Plan, the Elevate RAP's vision, it's to enhance the financial well-being of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples, businesses and communities.
Yes.
And I guess now more than ever before, we need to make sure that, whatever's in that RAP, that we start delivering on it and we start bringing things forward if we have to. But I've always seen Commbank as a leader in the reconciliation space, and, there's a lot riding on some of the big corporates like Commbank to make sure that the Indigenous business sector doesn't go under, because a lot of us don't have that financial security and that backup plan. A lot of us are the small to medium enterprises as well. So it will be challenging times, but I'm staying optimistic and very hopeful that we can keep doing business regardless of the circumstances that we're in at the moment.
Look, so do I, Mundanara. And I think just in the closing just touching on the Reconciliation Action Plan, we've committed to 14 key outcomes in the 2022 RAP, and that extends from ensuring that we recognise culture of the community and various communities, and it extends even to education, careers, to make sure we employ the Aboriginal people within our business. financial well-being, to make sure that we have products and services that suit the businesses and the communities that we're working in. And so similar to that, so there's 14 outcomes they are, but please, if you need to know more about it, jump on our website, Commbank website, and the full reconciliation action plan's on there. But on the closing to Mundanara, let me just extend my gratitude and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to talk to you about this. I know it is challenging times at the moment for all businesses, not just Indigenous businesses. So, but we also, there's enough help around. So please reach out and ask us if we can help, and I'm sure we'll be able to. If you have bankers around, if not, reach out to our iCare line or the call centres, and we'll be able to have a yarn to you and see what we can do.
True, Deadly. And Noel, I need to quickly ask you before we do wrap up, the Indigenous Customer Assistance Line. You mentioned the iCare line, and that's a service that's offered, a phone service that's offered to Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people in remote locations, right? Absolutely, and because we know, I think we're not our footprint is not that well prevalent when I get in the remote spaces, so remote parts of the country. So iCare is a service we provide, a telephone banking service we provide for remote communities to be able to help them to continue to bank where your coverage couldn't be well, or we haven't got the branch network. So these communities and customers can still do the day-to-day banking over the phone with us. Excellent. And I think that's really important that we basically mention some of the products and services that some of our mob don't even know exist at Commonwealth Bank. So thanks very much for your time and for joining me on the Black Magic Woman podcast. And I look forward to talking to you again in the near future. Thank you, Mundanara, and thank you for the opportunity. No worries. And as we say in my language, we say "wada muli," but in Fijian, we say "mode binaka." Mode. Have a good day. Thank you. See you. Bye-bye. And that was Noel Prakash, the National Manager of the Indigenous Banking Social Impact Team at Commonwealth Bank, a very passionate person who is about creating real and sustainable change around how Indigenous businesses and communities are banked and the role he plays in helping create financial independence for Indigenous peoples. On our next episode, I'll be yarning with Dr. Blaise Queermullina, a business owner, academic and author. And we yarn about family, culture, Indigenous knowledges, and also his many business ventures. So stay tuned for that episode. Bye for now.